She heard a faint whisper coming from under the ground and couldn't walk past it. But when she rescued him, the millionaire told her something that turned their lives upside down. Don't forget to subscribe and check out other stories on the channel. Monica never intended to walk so far that evening. The sky had turned a soft copper, the sinking sun staining the clouds with bruises of pink and gold, and the breeze smelled of wet leaves and the promise of rain. She was tired, as always, from the double shifts that left her body aching, her fingers cracked from soap and cold water, her eyes stinging from the dust of offices she cleaned each dawn. But she needed this walk, needed it almost as much as she needed the paycheck she would collect at the end of the week. And so she had taken Layla's small hand in hers and followed the narrow dirt path behind the complex, out past the leaning fences, into the woods where the world seemed quiet enough to allow breathing. Layla, only 6 years old, was chattering about school, about the story the teacher had read that day, about how she wanted a room with yellow paint, like in the book, and a small tree to climb when the weather was warm again. Monica answered with hums and small words, her mind already drifting toward the letters waiting on the kitchen counter, the bills marked in red, the late notices that made her stomach clench each morning. The world outside these woods was a place of relentless noise and hunger, and in the soft hush beneath the trees, Monica allowed herself to imagine for just a moment that she was not failing. They always took the same path, where roots tangled underfoot and squirrels darted, where birds called from branches too high for Layla to reach, no matter how high she stretched. Layla skipped ahead, her small boots crunching over last year's dead leaves, the yellow ribbon in her hair bobbing with each step. Monica let her go, watching with that aching mixture of love and fear that came with motherhood, the fear that something would always take her daughter away if she wasn't careful, wasn't fast enough, wasn't everything all at once. It was when Layla stumbled that Monica's heart stilled, her breath catching. The child's foot caught on a thick root, sending her forward with a small cry. Monica rushed to her, dropping to her knees in the dirt, gathering Layla in her arms, checking for blood, for broken bones, for that scream that would mean the hospital, another bill, another day missed from work. "I'm okay, Mama," Layla sniffed, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. Monica kissed the dampness from her forehead and was about to lift her when she heard it. At first, it was so soft it could have been the wind, a trick of the rustling leaves, the sigh of branches overhead. "Help." She froze, her arms tightening around Layla, who looked up at her with wide, questioning eyes. "Mama, did you hear that?" Monica swallowed. She was tired, too tired, her mind playing tricks on her perhaps. She shifted, preparing to stand. "Please. Water." There was no mistaking it that time, the words nothing more than a breath against the hush of the woods, but there, and Layla clutched her hand tightly. "Someone's crying, Mama," Layla whispered, pressing closer. Monica looked around, but there was nothing, only the trees, the shadows deepening as the sun sank lower, the hush so complete it made her ears ring. She should leave, should take Layla home, lock the doors, pretend she heard nothing. The world was filled with dangers she could not afford, and this was not her fight. But then Layla's small hand squeezed hers, and her daughter's eyes were pleading, and Monica's heart, tired as it was, would not allow her to walk away. "Stay behind me," she told Layla softly, and moved toward the sound. They stepped carefully over the tangled roots, Monica's boots slipping in the soft, damp earth, Layla's breath coming quick in the hush as they approached the base of an old oak tree, its roots thick and gnarled, twisting over the ground like the back of a sleeping dragon. It was there that Monica saw it, half buried beneath leaves and dirt, a patch of rusted metal peeking through the earth. Monica knelt, brushing away the leaves, the dirt clinging to her fingers. The metal was cold, rough beneath her touch, and as she cleared it, she saw it was a vent, small and corroded, nearly hidden by the twisting roots. "Help me." The words came again, hoarse, desperate, from beneath the ground. Monica's breath came fast, her hands trembling as she pressed her ear closer to the vent. "Hello?" she called, her voice shaken. A groan, then silence, then the whisper again, weaker now. "Water." Monica looked around, frantic, her mind racing. She pulled the small bottle of water from Layla's backpack, unscrewed the cap, and carefully poured a thin stream through the slats of the vent, hearing the sound of swallowing, of gasps between gulps, a sound that made her throat tighten. "We're going to get you out," she said, her voice firm, though her heart was pounding so hard she thought she might faint. She didn't know how. She had no tools, nothing but her hands, her cracked nails, her raw palms. But she could not leave. She would not leave. She began to dig, pushing away the dirt, pulling at the tangled roots that clawed at the metal hatch. The earth was damp, heavy, the cold seeping into her bones, but she kept digging, ignoring the pain as her nails split as blood welled beneath the dirt on her hands. Layla stood beside her, silent now, her small face pale, her eyes wide, handing Monica a stick to help loosen the packed soil, dropping to her knees to help push the dirt aside. The forest around them held its breath, the birds silent, the wind stilled, the world shrinking to the patch of earth they fought to clear. Bit by bit, the metal hatch revealed itself, covered in rust, the hinges groaning as Monica pried at it with her fingers, the cold biting, her muscles screaming from the effort. She could not stop. She would not stop. She pulled, the hatch creaking, resisting, until with a final wrench it swung open, and a rush of warm, fetid air escaped, hitting her in the face, making her cough, her eyes burning with tears she would not let fall. She peered inside, the darkness swallowing the weak light of the dying day, and then she saw him. A man, barely conscious, his clothes torn, his skin pale beneath streaks of blood and mud, his hair matted, his lips cracked, his eyes fluttered open, unfocused, landing on her face with a desperation that made her breath catch. "Please," he rasped, so soft she almost missed it. "Help me." Monica reached down, her hands shaking. "Give me your hand," she said, her voice steady, though she felt as if she might collapse. "Come on, I've got you." His arm moved, trembling, lifting only inches before falling back with a grunt. She reached further, bracing herself, gripping his wrist, pulling with everything she had. He came free slowly, like a ghost rising from the grave, his body weak, collapsing against the earth as she lowered him to the ground. His breath was ragged, his eyes rolling back as he tried to speak. She leaned close, catching the rasp of his words. "I used to have a family," he whispered. "The one I trusted most buried me alive." His head rolled to the side, unconsciousness taking him, and for a moment Monica froze, the weight of his words sinking into her bones. She pressed her fingers to his neck, finding the weak, fluttering pulse. He was alive, but barely. She looked at Layla, who was watching with wide eyes, her small hands clutched together. "We're taking him home," Monica said. Layla nodded, without fear, without hesitation. And in that moment, as Monica lifted the man as best she could, as she draped his limp arm around her shoulders and began the long, heavy walk back through the woods, she knew everything had changed. She did not know who this man was, or what had brought him to a grave beneath the roots and silence of the forest. But she knew this: she would not leave him. She would not walk away. And whatever darkness had buried him there, whatever truth was waiting to surface, it was far from over. When they reached the edge of the woods, the last light of day was fading, the sky deepening to blue, the first stars piercing through. The world felt heavy, the road back to their small home endless, the man's weight pulling at her shoulder, at her strength. But Layla walked beside her, small and brave, holding on to the edge of the man's torn jacket to keep him steady. And for the first time in a long time, Monica felt something other than fear, something stronger than exhaustion. She felt the spark of a promise, the echo of her own whispered vow. No one deserves to die alone, forgotten, beneath the earth. And as they crossed the threshold of their small home, the door clicking shut behind them, Monica knew she had just stepped into a fight she could not yet see, into a story that would test every piece of her strength, her hope, her love. But she was ready, because this time she would not let the world take everything. Not again. The house smelled of damp wood and the faint citrus of cheap soap when Monica pushed the door open, the hinges sighing under the weight of the day that followed them inside. The man was heavy, dead weight against her shoulder. Every step she took a reminder of the burden she had chosen to carry, and Layla pressed close, her small hand gripping the fabric of Monica's coat as if afraid to let go. The hallway was narrow, the light bulb overhead flickering once before settling into a weak glow that did nothing to ease the heaviness pressing into Monica's chest. She could have left him there in the woods. The thought came and went like a breath, replaced by the memory of his eyes, the desperation there, the cracked whisper of a man who had been buried beneath the earth, left to die alone, whispering for water into the darkness. She could not leave him, and that choice was now heavy in her arms, in the way her bones ached from the weight of him, in the way Layla's eyes followed her with quiet fear and wonder. She managed to lower him to the floor just inside the door, his head lolling to the side, breath rattling in a way that made her fear the silence that might come next. Layla knelt beside him, touching the sleeve of his torn, dirt-caked shirt, her eyes wide, unblinking. "Is he going to die, Mama?" Layla's voice was a whisper, fragile as the light above them. Monica didn't answer immediately. She pressed her fingers to his neck, finding the flutter of his pulse, faint but there. Her own heart was beating too fast, fear and exhaustion making her limbs feel like water, but she forced herself to breathe, to focus. "Not if we can help it," she said finally, brushing the hair from Layla's forehead. She needed to move him, needed to keep him hidden until she could figure out who he was and what danger might come looking for him. The house was too small, too open, and if someone came looking, she would have nowhere to hide him, nowhere to hide Layla, if it came to that. Her eyes turned to the window, where the wind rattled the glass, the trees outside whispering in the darkness. "Help me, baby," she said, and together they lifted the man again, Monica bearing most of the weight as Layla guided the way to the back door, through the narrow hall, past the tiny kitchen with its chipped counters and the scent of last night's rice and beans still lingering in the air. They stepped into the backyard, the cold biting, the moonlight washing everything in silver, the rusted swing set creaking as the wind moved through it. The shed stood at the edge of the yard, leaning slightly, its door hanging crooked on its hinges, the roof patched with old tarps Monica had nailed down herself the previous winter. It had once held Layla's toys, old paint cans, the remnants of a life that had never had the chance to be easy. Now it would hold something else. Monica pushed the door open, the smell of dust and earth rushing out to meet them. She cleared a space, moving boxes and crates, spreading an old blanket over the floor before they lowered the man down, careful with his head, careful with the brokenness of him. Layla knelt again, watching as Monica checked him over, her hands working with the steadiness of someone who had learned to do everything alone. The man groaned, a sound that scraped against the quiet, his eyes fluttering open, unfocused, before landing on Monica's face. For a moment, there was fear there, panic, and his hand shot out, weak but desperate, grabbing at her wrist. His eyes were wild, the white stark against the grime on his skin. "Please," he whispered, the word ragged, torn from a throat that had known too much screaming in the dark. "Don't leave me." Monica swallowed, her mouth dry. She could see the bruises on his arms, the raw marks around his wrists, the dirt caked beneath his fingernails, and something inside her softened, something that hurt in the quiet spaces of her heart. "I'm not going to leave you," she said, her voice firm, because if there was one thing she knew, it was how it felt to be left, to be forgotten, to be alone when you needed someone the most. His hand fell away, his eyes closing again, and Monica sat back on her heels, breathing out slowly. Layla's eyes were on her, wide, trusting. "Is he going to be okay?" Layla asked again. Monica looked at her daughter, at the small hands clutching the edge of the blanket, at the worry in her eyes that no child should have to carry. "He's going to need us," Monica said, reaching out to tuck a curl behind Layla's ear. "And we're going to help him." That night was long, the cold seeping through the thin walls of the shed, the wind rattling the door, the trees groaning outside. Monica moved back and forth between the house and the shed, bringing water, tearing old sheets into strips to clean the wounds on the man's arms, wiping the dirt from his face with a rag dipped in warm water. She boiled rice and beans, tried to coax him to eat, but he was too weak, his eyes opening only briefly before closing again, a groan the only answer to her quiet words. At one point, as dawn was just a pale bruise on the horizon, he woke again, his hand reaching for hers, eyes wet with tears that cut clean tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "They took everything," he whispered, the words slurred, heavy with sleep and fever. "My family, my son, they buried me." Monica's heart clenched. She didn't know him, didn't know his story, but the pain in his voice was the kind that could not be faked, the kind that echoed with truth. "What's your name?" she asked softly, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. His lips moved, a sound coming out that was more breath than word, and she leaned closer. "Elijah," he whispered finally, his eyes closing again. "Eli." He drifted back into unconsciousness, and Monica sat there for a long time, holding his hand, listening to the ragged pull of his breath, feeling the weight of what she had taken into her life, into her home. When she finally returned to the house, Layla was waiting at the kitchen table, her small hands wrapped around a cup of water, her eyes heavy with sleep but filled with questions she was too afraid to ask. Monica kissed the top of her head, held her close, and promised her it would be okay, even though she wasn't sure how to make that promise true. The day passed in a blur of small tasks, of reheating soup and cleaning, of checking on Eli in the shed, of watching the rise and fall of his chest, of pressing a cool rag to his fevered skin. Layla helped, carrying cups of water, sitting beside Eli and telling him stories about school, about the stars, about the wish she had made for a tree of her own to climb. Monica watched them, something breaking and healing in her all at once. She didn't know who Eli truly was, didn't know what had brought him to that grave beneath the earth, but she saw the bruises on his wrists, the haunted look in his eyes when he woke, the way he flinched from sudden sounds. She recognized the fear in him, the desperation of someone who had trusted the wrong people, who had been hurt by those meant to protect him. It was a look she had seen in her own reflection too many times to count. And so she continued to care for him, continued to feed him small spoonfuls of soup when he was able, continued to wash his wounds, to change the rag on his forehead, to hold his hand when the fever dreams came, and he whispered about betrayal, about a son he needed to find, about a life he needed to reclaim. At night, when Layla was asleep, curled up under the thin blanket in the small room they shared, Monica would sit in the shed beside Eli, the lantern casting soft shadows on the walls, the smell of earth and rust heavy in the air. She would watch him breathe, her own breath matching his, a quiet promise in the darkness. "You're safe now," she would whisper. The words meant as much for herself as for him. In those moments, Monica felt the weight of what she was doing, the risk, the danger that might come for them if someone was looking for Eli, if someone discovered he was alive. She thought of Layla, of the life she was trying to build for her, of the fragile safety they had, and she was afraid. But when Eli would wake, when his hand would clutch at hers in the dark, when his eyes would open and find her there, the fear would ease, replaced by something stronger. She could not leave him. She would not leave him. No one deserved to be buried alive, to die alone, to be forgotten. Not while she was there. Not while she could fight. And as the dawn came again, pale and cold, painting the world in soft light, Monica knew that whatever was coming, whatever truth lay buried with Eli's past, she would face it, because she had chosen to save him. And she would see it through. The morning came quietly, its gray light slipping through the cracked edges of the shed door, softening the sharp edges of the world that had hardened around Monica's shoulders. She sat on the cold floor, back against the wooden wall, the lantern flickering low as she watched Eli sleep. His breath was uneven, the rise and fall of his chest shallow, but it was steadier now than it had been the night before. His fever breaking under the weight of wet cloths and whispered promises that he was not alone. Outside, the world moved as it always did. Cars rattled past on the street, dogs barked, and the wind rattled the window of the small kitchen where Layla was sitting with her crayons, her tongue caught between her teeth as she focused on the picture she was making. Monica could see her from where she sat. That small glimpse of normalcy, like a thread she held onto to keep herself from falling apart. She could hear Layla humming softly, the sound pulling her back from the edge of the fear that pressed around her as she looked at Eli's bruised wrists, the cuts on his arms, the dirt that still clung to the edges of his hairline. She reached for the bowl of warm water, dipping the cloth again, wringing it out before pressing it gently to his forehead. His skin was hot, but not as hot as it had been, and he stirred under her touch, a small sound catching in his throat before his eyes fluttered open, confusion and pain blinking through the haze as they focused on her face. "It's okay," Monica said softly, her voice steady, even as her heart knocked hard against her ribs. "You're safe. You're here." For a moment, he simply stared, the lines around his mouth tightening, his hand twitching against the blanket as if he wasn't sure if he should trust the safety she promised. Then, as if the weight of exhaustion was stronger than fear, He let out a long, shuddering breath and closed his eyes again, his body relaxing under her hand. Monica sat back, pulling in a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, letting the tension ease from her shoulders as she wiped the cloth across his arms, clearing away the remnants of dirt and blood that still marked his skin. The marks on his wrists were angry, red abrasions that told stories of ropes pulled too tight, of hands bound for too long. She had seen marks like that before, though not on strangers, but on herself, in moments when the world had closed its fist around her and there had been no one to help her loosen its grip. She finished cleaning his arms, pulling the thin blanket tighter around him before standing to stretch, her muscles stiff from hours spent in the cold, her back aching from the constant bend and reach of care. She opened the door to let in a breath of fresh air, the cold wind biting at her skin, clearing the heaviness from her mind for a moment. Layla looked up from her drawing, her small face lighting up with a smile that cut through the darkness like a beam of light. "Is he better, Mama?" she called, her voice bright with hope. Monica managed a small smile, nodding as she stepped into the house, closing the shed door gently behind her. "He's getting better, baby. He just needs rest." Layla held up her drawing, a picture of a tree with a swing, 2 stick figures underneath it, one big, one small, their hands connected by a line of color. "I drew him a picture so he won't be scared when he wakes up." Tears burned behind Monica's eyes, but she blinked them back, reaching out to ruffle Layla's curls, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. "That's beautiful, Layla. I think it will make him very happy." They spent the morning quietly, Monica moving between the shed and the kitchen, heating up water on the small stove, tearing old sheets into fresh strips to use as bandages, checking on Eli as he drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes whispering words she could barely catch. Names she didn't recognize, places that meant nothing to her, broken phrases about betrayal, about promises, about a son. The word son caught at her every time, pulling at a place deep inside her that still hurt, still remembered the nights she had held Layla close while the world outside their door turned its back on them, while the man who was supposed to love them had walked away, leaving silence in the place where promises used to live. In the afternoon, Eli woke again, his eyes clearer this time, though they still held shadows, the lines of pain etched deep around them. He looked around the shed, taking in the rough walls, the makeshift bed on the floor, the small heater Monica had managed to find in the back of a closet to take the chill from the air. "Where am I?" His voice was rough, the words scraping from a throat that sounded unused to speaking. Monica crouched beside him, handing him a cup of warm water, watching as his hands shook while he tried to bring it to his lips. She steadied the cup, letting him sip slowly, his eyes closing as the water soothed the dryness of his mouth. "You're safe," she said again, and it was becoming a mantra, something she needed to believe as much as he did. "You're in my home. You were buried in the woods. My daughter and I found you." He coughed, the sound harsh, but he nodded, setting the cup down with a trembling hand. His eyes lifted to hers, and for a moment there was a flash of something like shame, something like fear, and it made her want to reach out, to tell him he didn't have to explain, that she could see the truth written in the bruises on his skin. "I don't know why you helped me," he said, his voice softer now, breaking on the words. Monica took a breath, letting it out slowly. "Because no one deserves to die alone," she said, and it was the simplest truth she knew. His eyes closed again, a tear sliding down the side of his face, cutting through the dirt that still clung to his skin. They left me, he whispered, his voice cracking. The people I trusted, my family, they buried me. Monica reached for his hand, holding it gently, letting him feel the warmth of another person, the reality that he was not alone anymore. She didn't press him, didn't ask questions, letting him speak at his own pace, letting the words come as they needed to. He told her about the company he had built, about the clinics they had opened in poor communities, about the way he had believed he was doing good, was helping people, was making a difference. He spoke of his wife, of his brother, of the man he had considered his closest friend, and how they had taken everything from him, had turned his trust into a weapon, had stolen not just his money, but his name, his life. He told her about his son, about the promise he had made to be home for dinner, about the model rocket they had planned to build together, about the way his son's eyes had lit up when he spoke of the stars, of dreams, of the future. "I thought I would die in that box," he said, his eyes staring at the ceiling, tears slipping down his temples. "All I could think about was my son, about how I didn't get to say goodbye, how I didn't get to tell him I loved him." Monica's hand tightened around his, her own tears slipping free now, falling onto the blanket between them. She knew that feeling, that fear of leaving a child behind, of not being there when they needed you most. She knew it too well. "You're not gone," she said, her voice firm, steady. "You're here, you're alive, and you're going to see him again." He turned his head to look at her, his eyes red, swollen, but clear for the first time, a spark of something like hope flickering there. He nodded, his lips trembling. "Thank you," he whispered, the words so soft she almost didn't hear them. "Thank you for not leaving me there." Monica squeezed his hand, letting the silence settle around them, a silence that felt different now, softer, filled with the quiet promise of a future that had not been there before. That night, as Layla slept curled against Monica's side, her small hand resting over her mother's heart, Monica lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the day pressing against her, but not crushing her. Eli was alive. He was here. And she would help him find his son, help him reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. Because in saving him, she had found something too, a reminder that even in the darkest places there was light, that even when the world tried to bury you, you could still rise, still fight, still choose to live. And she would fight for him, for Layla, for the promise of a tomorrow that was worth waking up for. She closed her eyes, letting sleep finally take her, the sound of Eli's breathing in the shed just beyond the window, a quiet reminder that hope was still alive, that the fight was just beginning, and that she was not alone anymore. The days that followed unfolded slowly, carrying with them a quiet rhythm that pressed against Monica's ribs like a reminder of everything she was trying to hold together. The cold crept deeper into the small house each morning, frost threading across the edges of the windows, whispering reminders of unpaid heating bills and the threats that came in red envelopes, piling on the kitchen table, demanding money she did not have. Each letter was a promise of something worse, eviction, a final notice, a reminder that the world did not care if a single mother and her child had nowhere to go, as long as the payment arrived on time. She would stare at those letters in the early dawn light, Layla still curled in her blanket in the next room, the air so cold that Monica could see her own breath as she stood there, pressing her hand flat against the table to keep herself steady. She would push them aside each day, tucking them into the drawer with the others, because what could she do but keep moving, keep working, keep pretending she could outrun the weight of everything closing in around them. And through it all, Eli was there, in the shed, a constant reminder of the choice she had made, the risk she had accepted when she had pulled him from the dirt and carried him home. She checked on him before dawn, bringing him water, a piece of bread, a small bowl of leftover rice when she had it. Each time she entered the shed, she felt the chill ease a little, the warmth of the small heater she had managed to keep running washing over her as she knelt beside him, checking the bruises, pressing the back of her hand to his forehead to feel for the fever that sometimes still crept back in the dark hours of night. He was getting stronger, slowly. His eyes clearer when they met hers now, his voice rough but steady as he thanked her for the food, for the water, for not leaving him in that hole to die alone. He started sitting up for longer periods, leaning against the wall as he sipped the broth she made from the scraps she could gather, watching her with those steady eyes that saw too much, that made her feel both seen and afraid of what he might see in her. Layla had begun to slip into the shed after school, carrying her small drawings, her crayons tucked into the pockets of her worn jacket, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Eli as she explained each picture to him with the seriousness only a child could have. She showed him the picture of the tree with the swing, explaining that it was the tree she wanted in their yard one day, so she could swing high enough to see the whole world. Eli listened, nodding, asking questions in a soft voice, the corners of his mouth pulling into a smile that looked like it hurt to form, but was real all the same. Watching them together did something to Monica, something she could not fully name. It was a mixture of warmth and fear, a reminder that there was still kindness in the world, that even a man who had been buried alive could find a way to smile again, to listen to a child's dreams, to be present in a way that no man in Monica's life had ever managed to be. The nights were the hardest. After Layla was asleep, Monica would sit at the small table, the pile of bills before her, the numbers swimming in her tired eyes as she tried to figure out how she would keep the lights on, how she would pay the rent, how she would feed her child and keep the small heater running in the shed for Eli. Her hands would shake sometimes as she held her head, the fear pressing down on her until she thought it might crush her completely. There were moments when she thought of the risk, of what it would mean if someone found Eli there, if someone came looking for him, if the police knocked on her door, taking everything she had left, taking Layla. But in those moments, she would remember his voice, the way he had whispered about his son, the way he had clung to her hand, the way he had thanked her with tears in his eyes. She would remember the promise she had made to herself, that she would not leave him, that she would not be like the world that had turned its back on him. And so she would fold the bills, tuck them away again, and get up the next morning to do it all over, to care for her daughter, to care for the man who was slowly finding the strength to live again. One evening, as the sun was bleeding out across the horizon in a smear of orange and purple, Monica entered the shed to find Eli awake, sitting up fully for the first time, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, his eyes sharp and filled with a kind of quiet determination that had not been there before. He looked at her, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, his jaw working as if he was trying to find the right words. "I need your help," he said finally, his voice low but steady. Monica set down the bowl of soup she had brought, crossing her arms over her chest to steady herself. "What do you need?" He took a breath, letting it out slowly, his eyes closing for a moment before opening again, locking onto hers. "I need to get in touch with someone. I need to find out what happened to my son." Monica's heart clenched, the fear rising up so quickly it made her dizzy, the thought of what helping him might mean, the danger it could bring to her and Layla. But she saw the way his hands shook, the way his eyes glistened with the weight of what he was asking, and she knew she could not say no. "Okay," she said softly, stepping closer, sitting down on the crate across from him. "Tell me what you need me to do." He explained slowly, haltingly, about the accounts he had set up, the contacts he might still have, the passwords he remembered from the life that had been stolen from him. He spoke of a man named Daniel, someone he believed he could trust, someone who might know where his son was, who might know what his wife and brother had done with the company, with the money, with the life they had stolen from him. "I can't do it alone," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't even know if he'll believe it's me, but I have to try." Monica nodded, her mind already moving, already forming a plan. "We'll go to the library tomorrow," she said. "They have computers there. We can send an email, see if he responds." Eli let out a breath that sounded like a sob, his shoulders sagging as the tension eased from his body. "Thank you," he whispered, his eyes closing. That night, as Layla slept, Monica lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the fear clawing at her, the knowledge of what she was risking pressing down on her like a weight she could not shake. But she also felt something else, something like purpose, something like hope, a reminder that she was doing something that mattered, that she was helping someone who had been left for dead, who was trying to find his way back to his son. The next morning, after dropping Layla at school, Monica and Eli made their way to the library. He walked slowly, leaning on her arm, each step careful, measured, but determined. They found a computer in the corner, Monica helping him sit down, watching as he carefully typed out the email, his hands shaking, his breath catching as he hit send, the message traveling out into the world like a prayer. They waited, the minutes stretching into an hour, Eli's eyes never leaving the screen, his hands twisting in his lap. When the response came, a single line on the screen, Eli let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, his hand reaching out to grip Monica's. "It's really you?" Eli typed back slowly, tears running down his face as he explained, as he answered questions, as he told his story in clipped sentences, the words coming like a flood, like a dam breaking, like a man who had been buried alive finally able to speak his truth. When they left the library, the sky was gray, the air cold, but there was a lightness in Eli's step, a spark in his eyes that had not been there before. They walked back in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the promise of something more, of something better. That evening, as Monica prepared dinner, Eli sat at the small table, helping Layla with her reading, his voice soft, patient, encouraging as she stumbled over the words, his smile real, warm, a reminder that life could still find its way back, even after everything had been taken away. And, as they sat down to eat, Layla laughing at something Eli had said, Monica felt something loosen in her chest, something heavy lifting for just a moment, replaced by a warmth that settled deep in her bones. She knew it would not be easy, that the road ahead was still filled with fear, with risk, with debts that could not be paid with money alone. But as she looked at Eli, at Layla, at the small moment of peace they had found together, she knew that it was worth it. Because sometimes the things that mattered most were the things you could not measure, could not buy, could not pay back. Sometimes it was enough to choose to stay, to help, to believe, and for now that was enough. The cold seeped into the floorboards of Monica's small kitchen as dawn cracked open the sky, a thin light falling across the table where Eli sat with a cup of weak coffee between his hands. The steam curled up into the air, fogging the small window above the sink, and he watched it as though he could see something in that rising vapor that might tell him what was to come. Monica moved quietly, her footsteps soft as she prepared breakfast, the simple rhythm of their mornings becoming something steady, something real in a world that felt like it had slipped out of their control. Layla sat at the table, her feet swinging above the floor, a piece of toast in her hand, humming softly as she studied the picture book Eli had given her to practice her reading. Every so often she would look up at him, seeking approval, and he would nod, offering a small smile that reached his tired eyes, a warmth there that softened the lines of exhaustion and fear that still clung to him like a shadow. After breakfast, when Layla had left for school with a wave and a promise to read another page that evening, Eli and Monica sat together in the living room, the heater clicking as it struggled to push warmth into the small space. The library visit had awakened something in Eli, a fire that burned brighter with every hour as the messages from Daniel continued to arrive, each one piecing together the broken parts of the story Eli had been forced to leave behind. The accounts had been drained, the company seized, signatures forged in his name, a network of lies and theft hidden beneath the surface of what had once been his life's work. They didn't just take the money, Eli said quietly, his eyes fixed on the small notebook he had been filling with dates, names, and details as Daniel provided them. They took everything I built to help people, everything I was trying to leave for my son. Monica sat across from him, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup for warmth, her gaze steady as she listened. She saw the way his hands trembled, the way his jaw tightened as he flipped through the pages, each note another reminder of betrayal, each scribbled detail a map back to the moment they had decided he was worth more dead than alive. "We need proof," Monica said softly, reaching across the table to steady his hand as he turned another page. "Not just words, Eli. Proof they can't deny." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a determination that was sharp and clear, cutting through the exhaustion that still weighed down his body. "We'll get it," he said, his voice firm, and for the first time since she had pulled him from the dirt, Monica believed him without hesitation. The plan began to form in the quiet moments between them, laid out across the table like a puzzle they were determined to solve. Daniel provided documents, bank statements, old emails, and Eli and Monica spent hours sorting through them, marking inconsistencies, circling dates that did not match the story Verena and Clemens had crafted. They found transfers from accounts that should have been frozen, signatures dated weeks after Eli had been buried in the ground, evidence of a conspiracy so carefully hidden that it made Monica's stomach twist with anger as she read through the details. Late at night, after Layla was asleep, they would sit together in the small living room, the lamp casting a soft glow over the papers spread across the floor. Eli's hands were steadier now, his mind clearer, each piece of information bringing him closer to the man he had been before betrayal had buried him alive. Monica watched the transformation quietly, the way he sat straighter, the way his eyes lit up with each piece of evidence that confirmed what he had known all along. One evening, as the wind howled outside and the heater hummed softly, Eli looked up from the paper he was studying, his eyes meeting Monica's with a seriousness that made her breath catch. "There's a gala," he said, his voice low, "in 2 weeks. They're hosting it in my memory to announce a new partnership and expansion using the money they stole, the company they took. Verena will be there. Clemens will be there. And the media will be there too." Monica felt the weight of the words settle around them, the danger, the risk, but also the possibility, the chance to expose them for what they had done. She nodded slowly, her fingers tapping against the side of her mug. "You'll need to be ready," she said. "Strong enough to stand there to face them?" "I will be," Eli replied, and there was no hesitation in his voice. They spent the days that followed preparing, working in quiet urgency as they gathered everything they would need. Daniel helped them from a distance, guiding them through the digital maze of hidden accounts and encrypted emails, providing them with the evidence that would dismantle the lies Clemens and Verena had built. Monica learned how to scan documents, how to record calls using a small device Daniel had shipped to them, how to write messages that would draw out the truth from those who thought Eli was gone forever. Each day, Eli grew stronger. He began walking around the small yard, Layla holding his hand as they made slow laps past the rusted swing set. Past the garden Monica had once tried to keep alive before the bills had taken priority. Layla laughed as she told Eli stories about school, about her teacher, about the picture she was drawing for him of a tree with a swing that would reach the sky. In the evenings, Eli helped Layla with her reading, his patience and gentle encouragement drawing smiles from the little girl who had once been so afraid to speak. Monica would watch them, her heart aching with a warmth she hadn't felt in years, the sight of her daughter's laughter filling the small house with a light that pushed back the darkness that had lived there for so long. One afternoon, as they worked in the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner of rice and beans, Eli looked at Monica with a seriousness that made her pause. "You've given me more than I can ever repay," he said quietly, his hands resting on the table, fingers tracing the edge of the plate in front of him. Monica shook her head, placing a hand over his. "You don't owe me anything, Eli," she said softly. "We're just doing what's right." His eyes softened, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You remind me of the person I wanted to be, the person I tried to be before all of this." They sat in that quiet moment, the air warm with the scent of cooking, the world outside held at bay by the walls they had built around themselves, the small sanctuary they had created together. As the day of the gala approached, Monica and Eli finalized their plans. They would attend under the guise of a potential donor and a reporter interested in covering the event, using the evidence they had gathered to confront Verena and Clemens in front of the media, to expose the lies that had stolen Eli's life and nearly ended it. They practiced what they would say, how they would present the evidence, how they would handle the questions that would come. Monica felt the fear rising in her, the worry that something would go wrong, that they would be discovered before they could speak, that Layla would lose the small safety they had built. But when she looked at Eli, at the steady calm in his eyes, she found the strength to push the fear aside. The night before the gala, Monica tucked Layla into bed, sitting beside her as she read from the picture book Eli had given her, the child's voice soft and careful as she sounded out each word. When Layla fell asleep, her small hand curled around Monica's fingers. Monica sat there for a while, watching her daughter breathe, letting the quiet of the moment settle around her, drawing strength from the promise she had made to herself, to Layla, to Eli. No one would take this from them. When she returned to the living room, Eli was waiting, the final documents ready, the small recorder in his pocket, the evidence that would change everything tucked safely into the folder he would carry with him. He looked at her, and for a moment there was nothing to say. The quiet between them filled with the weight of what they were about to do, the hope, the fear, the promise of something better. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. He nodded, his hand tightening around the folder. "I'm ready." They stood there for a moment, the small room around them holding the echoes of their laughter, their fear, their hope, the light from the lamp casting soft shadows on the walls as they prepared to step into the world and take back what had been stolen. Monica reached out, squeezing his hand, the quiet strength between them a promise. "Then let's do this," she said. And together they stepped forward, ready to face the storm, ready to act, ready to fight for the truth, for the family they had found in the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy them. The morning of the gala arrived with a sky the color of steel, heavy clouds rolling over the city, carrying the promise of rain that never quite fell. Monica stood at the small bathroom mirror, brushing Layla's hair into neat braids, while the little girl hummed under her breath, her feet kicking gently against the sink cabinet as she sat on the edge, chattering about a dream she had of flying above the trees on a swing that touched the clouds. Monica smiled, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead, breathing in the warmth and softness of her before sending her to gather her small backpack, packed with snacks and the picture book she never left behind. Eli was waiting in the living room, wearing the simple gray suit they had found at the second-hand store 2 days before, a crisp white shirt beneath it, his hair neatly combed, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes softened by the determination that burned there now. He looked up when Monica stepped in, his gaze holding hers in the quiet that settled around them, the kind of quiet that came when there were no words left, only the weight of what was to come. Layla's footsteps broke the moment, the girl running in with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her eyes bright as she hugged Eli around the waist. "You look like a boss," Layla said proudly, stepping back to admire him. Eli smiled, ruffling her braids. "Thank you, sunshine. I need all the confidence I can get today." They walked to the car Daniel had arranged to pick them up, an old sedan with a heater that rattled and seats that smelled faintly of old leather, and Layla climbed in first, pressing her face to the cold window as the street slipped past, the world moving quickly while inside the car time felt suspended. Monica held Eli's hand as they drove, feeling the coldness of his skin despite the heater, the slight tremor in his fingers as he squeezed her hand in return. They didn't speak, but in the silence, promises passed between them, promises of truth, of justice, of something better on the other side of the fear that pressed against them with each passing mile. They dropped Layla off at the small community center where Mrs. Hill, the elderly neighbor who had often watched Layla during Monica's late shifts, was waiting with a warm smile, her gentle hands taking Layla's as she promised to read stories and bake cookies until Monica returned. Layla hugged Monica tightly, whispering, "Be brave, Mama," before turning to wave as Monica and Eli walked back to the car, the driver already waiting to take them to the hotel where the gala was being held. The hotel loomed large and bright against the gray sky, glass doors reflecting the world outside, the warm glow of chandeliers inside casting a soft light over the guests who stepped out of sleek black cars, laughter and chatter filling the air as they moved inside in clusters, dressed in suits and glittering dresses. Monica's stomach twisted as they stepped out, the cold air biting against her skin, the nerves alive beneath her ribs, but Eli's hand on her back steadied her, and when she looked at him, she saw not fear, but quiet resolve. Inside, the ballroom was a swirl of soft music and polite laughter, servers weaving between clusters of guests with trays of sparkling drinks and small bites balanced perfectly on their hands. Monica held the small clutch close against her side, the USB hidden inside pressing against her palm like a heartbeat, while Eli adjusted the knot of his tie, his eyes scanning the room until they found the stage at the front, draped in white linen, a banner above it declaring a celebration of life and legacy. She saw them before Eli did. Verena stood near the stage, her hair pulled back in an elegant twist, a black dress hugging her frame, her laugh loud as she leaned in to speak to a man Monica didn't recognize. Her hand rested on the arm of Clemens, who stood beside her in a navy suit, his smile sharp as he accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, clinking it gently against Verena's before taking a sip, his eyes scanning the crowd with the easy arrogance of a man who believed the world belonged to him. Eli froze for a moment, his breath catching, his eyes fixed on the two people who had stolen everything from him, who had left him to die in the cold, dark earth while they celebrated their victory in bright rooms filled with laughter and light. Monica placed her hand over his, grounding him, feeling the tremor in his fingers as he exhaled, closing his eyes before opening them again, his gaze steady now as he nodded to her. They moved through the crowd, weaving between conversations and polite laughter, nodding to strangers who offered them distracted smiles, the music rising and falling around them in gentle waves. Monica felt the weight of every step, the press of the USB in her hand, the eyes of Eli beside her as they approached the edge of the stage, waiting, watching, holding their breath for the moment to come. The lights dimmed slightly as a man in a tailored suit stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone to call for attention, his voice rising above the soft hum of the crowd as he welcomed everyone, speaking of Eli's legacy, of the company's future, of the work they would continue to do in his name. Monica felt the bile rise in her throat at the words, her fingers tightening around the USB as she glanced at Eli, who stood with his shoulders squared, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the stage where Verena and Clemens stepped up to join the speaker, their smiles gracious, their hands waving softly to the polite applause that rose around the room. Verena took the microphone, her voice smooth, polished, a performer's ease as she spoke of Eli's dedication, his vision, the way he had built the company from nothing to something that would live on forever, her eyes glistening with carefully crafted emotion as she spoke of the tragedy of his passing. Clemens stood beside her, nodding solemnly, a hand on her back, the perfect image of support and shared grief. Monica glanced at Eli, seeing the way his fists clenched at his sides, the way his eyes never left Verena as she spoke, each word a lie that layered itself over the truth they had fought so hard to reclaim. She stepped closer to him, slipping the USB into his hand, feeling the cold metal against her skin as she whispered, "Now." Eli stepped forward as the applause rose again, his voice steady as he called out, "Excuse me." The room quieted, heads turning, confusion rippling across the faces of the guests as they looked at the man who stood at the edge of the stage, his presence cutting through the polite warmth of the gala like a blade. Verena's eyes widened, her face paling as she recognized him, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came, only a small, choked sound that was quickly swallowed by the silence that fell across the room. Clemens stepped forward, his hand reaching for Verena's arm, his eyes narrowing as he stared at Eli, his mouth tightening into a hard line. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Eli said, his voice calm, clear, reaching every corner of the room. "But I believe you're celebrating my legacy, and I would like to say a few words." The silence broke into whispers, people turning to each other, eyes widening as they recognized the man who was supposed to be dead, the man they were here to mourn. Verena's hand shook as she reached for the microphone, but Eli stepped forward, his hand rising as he took it from her, their eyes locking in a moment of silent war before she let it go, stepping back, her face a mask of shock and fear. Eli turned to the crowd, lifting the microphone to his lips, his eyes scanning the faces before him, seeing the confusion, the curiosity, the flashes of cell phones being raised to record, the media representatives leaning forward, sensing a story unfolding in real time. "I am Elijah Carter," he said, his voice firm, carrying across the room, "and I am not dead." A gasp rippled through the crowd, the hush breaking into murmurs, the soft sound of disbelief mixing with the click of cameras and the glow of screens capturing the moment. "I was betrayed," Eli continued, his voice steady, each word deliberate, "by the people I trusted most, the people who stand before you today, using my name to build their future while they buried me alive to take everything I built." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the USB, holding it up for the crowd to see. "On this drive is the proof. Financial records, emails, forged signatures, documents showing the theft of millions, the betrayal of every value we stood for." Verena stepped forward, her face flushed, her mouth opening to protest, but Eli turned to her, his eyes sharp. "Don't," he said quietly, the single word stopping her in her tracks. He turned back to the crowd, lifting the USB higher. "This ends now." From the back of the room, 2 officers stepped forward, their badges catching the light as they moved through the stunned crowd, approaching the stage with quiet authority. Clemens turned, his face twisting with anger as he reached for his phone, but one of the officers took his arm, pulling it behind his back as they began to read him his rights, the words clear in the hush that had fallen over the room again. Verena's knees buckled, her hand clutching at the edge of the podium as the other officer approached her, taking her arm gently but firmly, her protests breaking into sobs as the truth she had buried finally rose, the weight of it too much to carry now that it was no longer hidden in shadows. Eli stood on the stage, watching as the people who had stolen everything from him were led away, the flash of cameras capturing every moment, the reporters already speaking into their microphones, the crowd buzzing with the electricity of the truth finally revealed. Monica moved to his side, standing with him as the room seemed to expand, the weight of the moment settling into her bones, the fear lifting as she looked at Eli, seeing the relief in his eyes, the quiet victory there, the promise of a future that was finally theirs to claim. The music had stopped, the lights bright above them, and for a moment, everything was still, the world holding its breath as the truth settled into the space they had fought so hard to create. Eli turned to Monica, his eyes soft, a small, real smile breaking across his face as he whispered, "We did it." And in that moment, standing in the bright lights of the stage where lies had once lived, Monica allowed herself to believe that they had, that the fight was worth it, that the truth mattered, and that from this moment on they would no longer be defined by the darkness that had once tried to bury them. They stepped down from the stage together, the future waiting, bright and real, for the first time in a long time. The days after the gala felt like waking from a long, relentless storm into the quiet that follows, when the air is sharp and clear, and every breath feels like something new. Monica stood at the window in the early dawn light, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, watching the sky bleed from gray to soft gold, feeling the stillness in the house settle around her like a gentle hand. For the first time in longer than she could remember, there was no dread in the pit of her stomach as she waited for the day to begin. No fear of letters in the mailbox, no cold whisper of uncertainty threading through her bones. Eli had moved into the small house with them, his presence folding into the rhythm of their days as if it had always belonged there. He had returned from the police station late that night after the arrests, walking up the steps to Monica's door with the quiet certainty of a man who had reclaimed his life, who had walked back from the edge and returned not just for himself, but for something larger, something worth protecting. Layla had waited up for him, her small hands reaching for his as she hugged him fiercely around the waist, whispering, "You did it," in a voice so soft and proud that Monica had to turn away, pressing her hand over her mouth to keep from crying. In the mornings, Eli would help Layla with her breakfast, pouring milk into her cereal with the careful attention of a man who understood the importance of small moments, who had learned that life was built in the quiet, unremarkable spaces that often went unnoticed. Layla followed him everywhere, asking questions, telling stories, her laughter ringing through the small rooms of the house as she pulled him into her world, with the innocent certainty of a child who believed fully in the goodness of those who loved her. Monica would watch them from the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, the warmth of the sight filling the spaces inside her that had been empty for so long. They spent afternoons in the small yard, the winter's chill fading into the soft promise of spring. Eli and Layla raking leaves into piles that Layla would jump into with squeals of delight, her braids flying as Eli pretended to be shocked each time she disappeared into the rustling mound. Monica joined them, pulling on old gloves as she tidied the edges of the yard, her eyes catching on Eli's as they shared small smiles, the kind that needed no words to understand. At night, after Layla was tucked into bed with her favorite book and the promise of a new story in the morning, Monica and Eli would sit at the small kitchen table, their hands wrapped around mugs of tea, the quiet between them filled with the gentle sounds of the house settling, the heater clicking softly, the wind moving past the windows like a soft breath. They spoke about the future in tentative words, about the foundation Eli wanted to build to help families like Monica's, about the programs they could start, the people they could reach. Monica found herself sharing ideas she hadn't let herself consider before, her thoughts unfolding in the safety of Eli's patient listening, his quiet encouragement making her believe in possibilities she had long tucked away as impossible. It was on one of those evenings that Eli brought out the plans for the foundation, spreading them across the table as he spoke about creating a place that would help single mothers find safe housing, that would offer resources and education for children who had been forgotten by systems meant to protect them, that would provide jobs and training for parents trying to rebuild their lives. Monica listened, her eyes tracing the lines on the papers, her heart swelling with the understanding that this was more than a plan for him. It was a promise, a commitment to the life he had almost lost, to the people he had vowed to help. Layla joined them sometimes, sitting on Eli's lap as she drew pictures for the foundation, her crayons moving quickly as she sketched out a logo of a hand reaching from the earth, touched by light, her small voice explaining, "Because you came from the ground, and Mama found you, and now we can help other people too." Eli kissed the top of her head, his eyes meeting Monica's over Layla's braids, and in that moment, Monica felt the fullness of the life they were building, the quiet power of the family they were becoming. The house began to change with them. Eli repaired the leaky faucet in the kitchen that had dripped for years, the rhythmic tap that had been a reminder of everything Monica couldn't fix now replaced with silence. He replaced the broken step on the porch, the one Monica had learned to avoid in the dark, her foot always pausing before stepping over it. Together, they painted the small bedroom that had once felt too empty, the soft yellow color Layla had always wanted, the walls now glowing in the afternoon light as Layla danced around the room, her laughter bouncing off the fresh paint. Eli's son, Oliver, arrived on a Saturday morning, stepping out of the car with a shy smile, his backpack clutched in his hands as he looked at the small house, at the woman who stood beside his father, at the little girl who waved at him with unfiltered joy. Eli dropped to his knees, opening his arms, and Oliver ran into them, the moment unfolding in the quiet street as Monica pressed her hand to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks as she watched Eli hold his son, whispering words she couldn't hear but understood all the same. Oliver settled into the house with the quiet of a child who had learned to wait, who had learned to hope without expecting too much. Layla pulled him into her world without hesitation, showing him her books, her drawings, the small swing Eli had hung from the old tree in the yard. They spent hours together, their laughter mixing as they built a small fort from blankets in the living room, whispering secrets in the dark until they fell asleep, the soft glow of the nightlight casting gentle shadows over their faces. Monica found herself watching Eli and Oliver together, the way Eli's eyes softened when he looked at his son, the quiet pride in the way he ruffled Oliver's hair, the gentle patience in the way he helped with homework at the kitchen table. She saw the echoes of the father Eli had always been, the father he had fought to return to, and, in those moments, Monica understood that some debts could never be measured, that some repayments came in the form of presents, of quiet mornings and shared dinners, of the laughter of children in a house that had once known only silence. The foundation launched quietly, without fanfare, in a small community center filled with folding chairs and neighbors who brought their children, who listened as Eli spoke about second chances, about the power of choosing to help even when it felt like the world had given up. Monica stood beside him, Layla at her side, Oliver holding Eli's hand. The small family they had created a testament to the truth Eli shared, to the promise that no one should ever be left to fight alone. After the launch, as the guests drifted away and the lights were turned off, Eli and Monica stood together in the quiet, the children asleep in the back room, the promise of the future warm between them. Eli turned to her, his hand lifting to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his eyes holding hers as he whispered, "Thank you for hearing me when no one else did." Monica smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks as she pressed her forehead to his, the weight of the journey they had taken together settling into the space between them. "You gave us hope," she whispered back, her hand pressing against his heart, feeling the steady beat there, the proof of life, of resilience, of love found in the most unexpected places. That night, as they returned home, the small house felt larger, filled with the quiet hum of belonging, the warmth of lights glowing in the windows, the soft laughter of children as they settled into their beds. Monica stood at the door for a moment, looking out at the yard where the old tree stood, the swing moving gently in the breeze, the stars blinking above like small promises of light. Eli stepped up beside her, his arm sliding around her shoulders, pulling her close as they stood there together, watching the world they had built, the home they had created from the ashes of everything that had tried to destroy them. In that moment, Monica understood that they had not just survived. They had found a way to live, to love, to build something real and lasting, something that would carry them forward no matter what storms came next. And for the first time in a long time, Monica felt at peace, knowing that the home that once stood in silence had now heard laughter, promises, and hope, and would continue to hold the warmth of a family who had chosen each other, who had chosen to stay, to fight, and to love. If you found this story meaningful, make sure to subscribe for more. Share this video with someone who needs it, and don't forget to check out our other stories here on the channel. Thank you for watching.